Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. He's born. He's a born genius. Writing music without fear. Composing with love. Yes, that was a haiku. It was supposed to be a haiku. Ignore the first line and just remember the second, third, and fourth line. The second, third, and fourth lines, those were the haiku. Just go back and rewind and re-listen to that, and then you'll get what I was trying to do. By the way, my name is Zoe. It's spelled Z-O or Z to the O for those of you outside of the U.S. This is Backlit Cinema, the podcast. Welcome. It's the 146th episode of the show. Thank you for downloading and streaming. We really appreciate it. We watched the movies of yesteryear, the movies of the latter half of the last millennium. If you like what you're about to hear, then tell your family, tell your friends, and tell that incredibly talented musical genius about our humble little show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I have another film enthusiast with me who enjoys great films as much as I do. He also enjoys moving pictures that may not be universally loved by many of his peers. Whatever the case, you'll enjoy his insights and his analysis as he takes a critical eye to the cinema of today and yesterday. Ladies, gentlemen, and folks across the gender spectrum, please welcome Derick McDuff from the Underrated Movie Podcast.
Wow, thank you. That was quite an introduction. I never had a hype man before. That was pretty great.
Yeah. I like to make my guests feel welcome because I'm so glad that you come on the show. And it's like my show is like a rinky-dink show. I'll put it that way. And I like it when people show up to my rinky-dink show. It's like it's a pirate broadcast over here.
Well, I don't know about rinky-dink. It's pretty. I think it's a pretty good setup over here. But yeah, thank you for that introduction. Like you said, I'm Derick McDuff of the Underrated Movie Podcast, where you can find, as you put it, talk about movies that of today and yesteryear, ones that people might have missed, ones that have slipped under the radar, passed people by, ones that are underrated and ones that are underappreciated. So I have a lot of fun talking about movies that might not get to be covered on other movie podcasts that are a little more prestigious stuff. Some of the ones that I talk about are ones that deserve a little bit more love.
Right, absolutely. I can appreciate that. As a matter of fact, I listened to a couple of podcasts like that. One is called The Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema. And they really get into the weeds of movies that people don't normally talk about on their shows. And then there's another one called Not a Bomb Podcast, and they talk about the movies that have bombed at the box office, and they basically reanalyze it and say, well, did this movie really bomb? And I enjoy both of those shows. Those are really good shows, and I'm glad you jumped into that arena. So let me ask now my questions are out of order because now I got to go and look for this question, because the comment that I just made is related to one of the questions that I wanted to ask. So, and the question is this: there are hundreds of other movie podcasts. So what influenced or encouraged you to start your own?
Well, I was always a big fan of podcasts, and the podcasts I listen to are generally movie-related podcasts. That's, what I love. I'm also like a writer and a film critic, so, I've kind of talking about movies, podcasting about movies has always been my bread and butter. And I wanted to do something that, was a little bit unique, and I guess you gave a couple examples of similar ones, but I always was like, I want to talk about movies that I love, about movies that, other people might not talk about. So it was, originally was me and a couple friends. It's, evolved into just kind of like a solo podcast with a guest usually. It's movies are something I've always been really, really passionate about. I've always been a big fan of podcasts as a medium. And so it was just kind of natural that at some point I would start my own movie podcast. It just took a little while to kind of figure out what exactly that would be. But one time I was just watching that movie Stardust, okay, the 2007 one, and I was like, man, this is a really underrated movie. And then I was like, wait a minute. I think I got it.
Yeah, you just can't go in and not have like a twist or a gimmick or just a way of looking at the subject just flatly. You gotta have a way of looking at it in a way that will attract people to listen to it. Like, you gotta be doing something that somebody else isn't doing, or saying something in a way that somebody else isn't saying it. So yeah, that's a great way to look at movies. Just look at the movies that are underrated. I've done a couple of, I don't know if I would call, I guess they are underrated, because I know that there are movies that nobody talk about nowadays. Like one of my favorite movies growing up is called The Last Dragon. And that was one of the movies that attracted some of my listeners, because it's like when you evoke The Last Dragon, it's like, hey, nobody talks about The Last Dragon. Let me listen to that episode, right?
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, sometimes I'll get that response, right? Sometimes we'll be like, oh my gosh, like, you know, whatever movie, it might be like, oh, like, you guys are talking about The Rocketeer. Like, I remember that from when I was a kid. That was so good. And there's like a big cult. And sometimes I'll be like, I'll make a like episode like, you know, like Black Hat or something. And like, that was a fun episode. It was a really great episode. But like, nobody cares about that movie, Black Hat. So, you know, like, sometimes it's always weird, you know, like, you never know what response you're going to get, which ones are going to bring the people out of the woodwork, and which ones people are going to be like, really? That one? So you never know.
Right. Yeah, that's funny, because I remember when Black Hat came out and I was almost interested in watching it, and people were saying that, oh, it's not that good. It's not that good. I am very susceptible to what critics or what like maybe the exiting audience might be saying about a movie. So when I started hearing that, I was like, well, I don't have a pocket full of cash, so maybe I'll skip that one.
See, yeah, no, and I get that, right? Because like Rotten Tomatoes has become such like a dominant force, you know, like, and I think that there is really just like kind of like a mono culture when it comes to movies a lot of time, where it's like, this movie is a good movie, this movie is a bad movie, and you're like not allowed to have like a dissenting opinion. Like you tell somebody like, oh man, like, I love this movie, people are like, that's a terrible movie, that's a dumb opinion, like, that's a bad opinion, you know, like, it's like, let me like this movie, man. I like this movie. You're not allowed to like, it's only got like a 2 point whatever on Letterboxd, you know, but it's like, you know what you want to like, you know, I don't ever want to yuck anyone's yum if you like the movie, you know. I think, and sometimes it goes in reverse too. Sometimes there's movies that people are like, this is a great movie, I'm like, I hated that one. So,
right. I think what it is that people take it personally, their likes and dislikes of movies or TV shows. And so like when they like a show and they're looking for validations of why they like the show. So they look to other people to say that they like the show. So I think people feel like if other people didn't like it, then they feel like they've made a wrong decision or made a wrong investment. But I think it's important to understand that, you know, your personality is your own. You don't have to wait for somebody to validate your opinion. Like, you're allowed to have a dissenting opinion. You're allowed to like something the way you want to like it. And sometimes, like, two people can like the same thing, but they'll like it for different reason. And then one person will get mad at the other for not liking it the way they like it. Like, what do you mean you didn't like the cinematography? That cinematography was fire. What are you talking about? You need to go kick rocks for not liking the cinematography on that movie, right? So, yeah, it's funny that way. But I think that as we learn, we just got to learn to accept that people like different things, and we need to allow them to like different things. Now, obviously, if there's a movie or TV show that's overtly offensive, then maybe there is a proper opinion. But for the most part, right. For the most part, it's like, man, just let people like what they want to like.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know what? Like, if you like a movie that I don't like, there's plenty of stuff that I don't like, but I don't like go on rampages about it. You know, I would much rather champion something that I think is good and that I like, you know, that other people don't like, than being like trying to tear something down that a lot of people like, unless it's something like you said that's like, you know, I think is like bad or like hurting the, you know, culture. Like if somebody comes up and they're like, you know what's a great movie, Triumph of the Will, it's got great cinematography, I'm like, hold up, no thank you, you know. But most of the time, 99% of the time, just like what you like, you know?
Right. Also, well, I can put out an example. Like most of the examples are really from the 30s and 40s, but one example of this is like the original Birth of a Nation, the incredibly racist blockbuster where racism was in vogue at the time. So everybody loved that movie, where you had people in blackface depicting African Americans as like basically animals, and it was not great. That's a bad movie.
That's a bad movie, and it's an example of a movie that like had a bad effect on the culture, because that movie kind of helped the KKK come back.
Right,
and you're like, not great.
So if you're the type of person who likes that movie, then I'm going to have questions, and that's something that I probably will take personally. But I think most modern movies, I think they're kind of avoid being so overtly offensive.
Yeah. So, I mean, there might be a couple,
right.
Made in bad faith, like
right.
But for the most part, movies you can like what you like.
Right. So speaking of movies that you like and dislike, you had put out a list on your Substack of the top 10 movies of 2023. And I didn't read everything. I just kind of glanced over it. But one of the movies that I noticed was missing, like one of the movies you had was Oppenheimer, but one movie that was missing was Barbie. And so now we got to talk about that. Now, was this something that you didn't like or you didn't see? Now, I'm not judging you because I hadn't watched Barbie yet. I know it's streaming, and I know I should be around to watching it. I hadn't watched either of those movies. I totally missed out. So I missed it's like I'm having, what's it called? I have the fear of missing out. FOMO. Yeah. I got extreme FOMO because I missed the whole cultural tidal wave that happened when those movies opened. So why isn't Barbie on your top 10?
Barbie's a good movie, right? Like Barbie is like a really good movie. I watched both of those opening weekend. I didn't do the back-to-back Barbenheimer thing,
right.
think that's insane.
That's too much.
But that's too much. It's too much whiplash. But like Barbie is a movie that I liked overall. I thought it was a very good movie. I thought it was way better than any Barbie movie had any right to be. I had a couple issues with it. It was a good movie, but in a year as good as 2023, which I think was a very, very good movie year, it wasn't gonna quite crack the top 10. Right.
Because you had I don't know. You didn't have Thor: Love and Thunder on that list, did you? You did have a list.
I did.
You had one movie.
Not.
You had one movie on the list that was questionable, and I'm forgetting it. Hold on, let me go back to the Substack, and because I forgot what that movie was. So most of the movies I obviously hadn't seen because apparently I don't go to the movies as much as I think that I should, I guess. But you did have Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and that movie is I hadn't seen it, so I'm not speaking from experience, but a lot of people that I talked to that have watched it were not exactly pleased with it, but you put that as one of your best movies for 2023.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about, right? Like the perception is like, oh, this is a bad movie, don't go and see it, blah, 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 whatever, But like I watched it and I loved it. I was like, this is like a great Indiana Jones movie. Like I love Indiana Jones. I was raised on the Indiana Jones movies. I don't even hate the fourth one, but that's like one of those things. It's like, you have to hate the fourth. Like it's this perception. This is a terrible movie. And I mean, it's the worst one, the fourth one, clearly. but I even liked the most recent one. It kind of, it did a lot of things that I loved in, the first one and the third one. I even kind of like slightly edge it out over the second one. Now it's not as good as those Indiana Jones 1 and 3. But it's a good movie, and I think that it just kind of became like a victim of just like, oh well, the early reviews, because Disney for some reason decided to premiere it at Cannes, which is like was a bad idea because it premiered on Rotten Tomatoes with like a 50-something rating, and you watch it like trickle in. The rating slowly crept up once it started to get to non-snooty French critics.
Right.
The rating got better over time, but by then it had already been labeled like bad movie. It did not do well at the box office relative to its budget. That was another problem. The budget was so out of control that it had to make a lot of money. It didn't make as much money as they expected, so it was kind of labeled as a bomb. Despite it making, a lot of money worldwide, it didn't cover its budget, at least on box office receipts.
That's kind of the definition of a bomb.
Yeah.
You gotta cover those receipts, son.
right. Because it cost like $300 million or something like that.
Totally unreasonable for a movie to cost that much money.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's one of those things that probably broke even, made its money back when you factor in like DVDs and Disney Plus,
right,
like theme parks style, all those things, but yeah, like it's just another one of those movies. Like that's why I say I'm gonna like what I want to like, and I know like some of my, some of the people that I respect a lot, some other podcasters hated that movie. I was like, you know what? Sure, like that's your opinion. My opinion is number 5 movie is a great movie year for me.
Right. That's no problem. But here's the thing, though. I hadn't seen it yet because I was gun shy after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I was super gun shy because it's like I had super high expectations for the 4th movie, and it's like, and when it didn't deliver, I was like, I don't know, do I really want to see the next one? It's like,
I think that hurt a lot of people because like the last one, 4, it did really well. Like it made like $800 million or something at the international box office, like, and because I think it was like, this is the first movie in so many years. And like, people don't really think about, like, there was almost as big a gap between 3 and 4 as there was between 4 and 5.
Right.
But I think by then it was just like, okay, here's another legacy sequel with Indiana Jones. Like, the last one burned us so bad. Let's not see this one,
So, and I think they premiered at Cannes. I believe that they had the same perception of the film as you did. They loved the film and they thought that it would do well at Cannes, and it did not meet the expectations that they had. So maybe they tested it out with the audience, and the audience really liked it, so they didn't have any problems with it. So I think that's why they probably premiered it at Cannes. So it was like, this is good. And it's like, what do you mean you don't like it?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because they did the same thing the same year with Elemental, which also same thing happened. It got bad reviews out of Cannes, like eventually, and it came out eventually. Like it started to creep up. That movie came out, did really bad initially, but it had really good legs, and like eventually that movie was kind of able to like. It opened like the same weekend as The Flash, which also was a huge bomb.
Right.
It initially got beat out by The Flash, but eventually made way more money than it. Just kind of through like sticking around and word of mouth, and family films always have good legs. So, that was the same scenario where they were like, the snooty French critics were like, Disney, no,
Right. What's funny is that you mentioned the movies that people hated it, but you liked. That was one of the movies that I actually liked. Like people, like I understand some of the parts that people didn't like about it, like the part at the end when they had all of those extra universes, when they had the different, versions of Superman and whatnot. But I actually liked that part. I didn't think that was a bad part. And I thought the movie overall was a really good movie. Like that's one of the best interpretations of like the Flash going back in time to save his mother. I think that's better than like the, what do you call it? The CW version. It had better be, but because it's a movie. But it was, and it's like, in spite of Ezra Miller's like, his personality and his legal troubles, he's still a good actor, and I got to give it to him. Like when he's in the movie and he's playing 2 different characters, he's playing 2 different versions of himself. You really believe you're watching 2 different people. You forget that that's the same guy playing 2 different parts. And that's amazing. And then another thing that he did that I really liked in that movie was that he made fun of himself. Like people had trouble with the way the Flash is depicted as running in the Snyderverse movies. But in the Flash, he made fun of that. And I thought that was like one of the best parts of that movie. So I didn't have as much problems with the Flash as a lot of other people, but I'm more forgiving with superhero movies in general than a lot of other people are. Like I loved, the second Doctor Strange movie. I loved Thor: Love and Thunder. I love both of those. I was like, I don't understand what you people's problems are.
I love, honestly, both of those movies I thought were great. Like Thor: Love and Thunder, like it didn't quite reach the levels of Ragnarok for me, but like I thought Multiverse of Madness was incredible. Like I loved that movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I concur. So you like you say, love what you love. But switching
Yeah.
over to another thing, I've watched a couple of your TikToks, and I think you had a TikTok about you. I guess you were beating the one of the Legend of Zelda games.
Oh yeah,
Did you do a
Majora's
speed run?
Mask.
Yeah, Majora's Mask speed run on that. I remember getting stuck on that game and never finishing it, and apparently you finished it in an hour and 35 minutes.
Well, so that was way back in the day. It wasn't a speed run necessarily, but it was just me betting my brothers that I could beat the game in a day, and it was so that TikTok is from like an old YouTube video that I made because unlike a speedrunner, I had no idea what I was doing. I just went in blind. I was not allowed to use any guides or like anything, and I had not beaten that game in like a couple of years, so I like didn't really remember how to do it. So like that was me just trying to like figure out how to, and I'm getting tired at the end. So that's what it was. It was 1:37 is the time that I like beat, like 1:37 p.m. or something.
Oh,
like that.
okay, right. Yeah, you did look a lot younger, and the video quality was poor. So I was like,
yes.
Oh, this looks like it was from a while ago. Are you still playing games?
I am actually, interestingly enough, because after I put that video up, I got bit by the bug and went back, and I've been playing Majora's Mask again recently. I just rebeat it again recently. I got like my Nintendo Switch like pass where you can play all the old games, the expansion pass, and so I've been playing a lot of old N64 and like Game Boy Advance games and stuff like that on my Switch.
Oh, nice. So, have you played video games that are based on movies?
Yeah, there's not a lot of great ones, but there are some gems. You know, speaking of N64 games, GoldenEye is like,
oh yeah, that's the champ right there.
Right? Yeah, you can't beat GoldenEye.
That's better than the movie.
Yeah, it really. Like, I love the movie, but the game is better. You know, there's some other good ones. Some good ones based on Lord of the Rings games. You know, I had Battle for Middle Earth back in the day, or the Return of the King game. So there's some good ones out there for sure. You know, they're few and far between, but you can find them.
Yeah, Shadow of Mordor was an excellent game.
Yeah.
I personally enjoyed the Matrix games when they were out. It was like subsidiary to the Matrix.
Or whatever.
Say again.
Enter the Matrix?
I think that's what it was called. It wasn't based on Neo. It's based on the side characters, but I really enjoyed that. It was like, I think it was a PlayStation 1 game, or maybe it was PlayStation 2. I think probably PlayStation 2. But I remember that the PlayStation had a hard time keeping up with the graphics. Like when you I
think I had it on GameCube, honestly.
Right. I might have had it on GameCube now that I think about it. So what was another one that I was thinking about? I'm actually getting some movies and games mixed up. I was thinking about Tomb Raider, then I remembered that Tomb Raider was the game before. What I meant to mention was the Star Wars games. So a lot of the Star Wars games are real good, but they've been like a ton of Star Wars games. That video game systems are choked with Star Wars games. So it's like, so it's almost to the point where it's like you're obviously going to have some good games and some bad games. But one of my favorite ones was the last one that came out with, not the last one. It's based on that series. It's the series with the Cal Kestis character, but I can't remember the name of the game.
Yeah, I had one of those games. It was like the Jedi Academy one, I think it was, where he's like your mentor. That was real fun. I liked that game a lot.
Oh, I didn't have that one.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of that game. I hate it when that happens. But anyways, I like the Cal Kestis character. He had that game. Then he had the sequel game that I hadn't played yet. And now there's a game coming out called Jedi Outlaws. Have you heard of that one?
Yeah, I was actually talking. It's Jedi Outcast. Is that the one?
It's either Outcast or
is there
Outlaws.
Another one? Okay.
It's one where you play basically a woman scoundrel, a woman version of Han Solo. That's the way I think of it.
Oh, okay.
And
I hadn't heard of that one.
She has a droid buddy.
Okay,
and I think
cool.
It's Outlaws. She's basically an outlaw, and you have to go on certain outlaw missions, I guess. I'm not exactly sure of the premise, but it looks really good.
That's cool.
Yeah. So you get to play something other than a Jedi. So that's going to be really interesting.
That's always cool when you get to kind of do the stuff that's off the beaten track. I always kind of like movie games like that, where it's like you're not just playing the movie, you're doing something to the side. Like you mentioned, the Enter the Matrix. I think it was you play as Jada in that game or something like that.
Right.
like, you know, because it's like it fills in the gaps between like 2 and 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
So I always love that when it's like, okay, you're kind of expanding the world rather than like retelling something. You're like, oh, you're getting all the, like, because the Star Wars galaxy, it's a big galaxy, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on. So it's like, you know, not everything has to be about the Jedi. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of, what are these guys doing over here, you know? So I always like looking at that.
What are the scoundrels doing? What are the gamblers doing? What are they doing? Right.
Yeah.
What are the shipbuilders doing? Are there any scandals going over there in the shipyards? So, have you seen the newest Star Wars, The Acolytes?
I haven't seen any of The Acolyte yet. I've heard really mixed things. I kind of want to watch it, mostly because Trinity is in it, you know, and like she's a badass. So I'm like, I should watch it, but it's just one of the things. I just haven't got around to it yet. You know, there's just so much stuff to watch, you know.
Right. Well, the people I've been listening to, I've been watching it, so I can tell you for myself that I really enjoy it. And the people that I've been listening to generally like it. I think mostly the consensus is the first 2 episodes are a little bit slow. And I think it's because they're easing you into this particular version of the universe. This is when the Jedi were at their height. It's 100 years before the Battle of Yavin. And this is when like the Jedi were just roaming around dispensing justice, and there's a mystery going on, and they got to solve this particular mystery. And to me, it was good from the first episode. Like I enjoyed the first, second. It's on the 4th episode now. I've enjoyed all of those episodes, but there are some people, like some of my peers, it was like the first and second episode may have been a little slow for them. But I thought it was great. Like, so.
Okay. I am gonna have to watch it. Like, it's one of those things. I just kind of think I got a little bit into Ahsoka, and I was like not super feeling it, so I just kind of fell off a little bit. But I really got to go back for this one. It seems more up my alley. Yeah,
I think Ahsoka is. I felt like this is better than Ahsoka. I'll put it that way. All right, probably not yet. I can't judge if it's as good as what's the one that everybody likes? Andor.
Andor is amazing.
Yeah. Probably, but it's like I don't want to judge like half the series. I think it only has 8 episodes, so I don't want to judge like half the series against the entire series of Andor. You have to wait because even Andor, a lot of people felt like the first couple of episodes were really slow, and then it really picked up after that. So that's how I'm kind of looking at the Acolytes. So
I might binge it. Honestly, I'll probably wait till it's over and then just shotgun the whole thing.
And you might want to do that because the at the end of episode 4, it ends on a cliffhanger, and you're like, you just can't leave me like this, and now I gotta wait an entire week to see what happens because it's an incredible cliffhanger. And I think I kind of went through that with X-Men 97. I still hadn't watched that series yet. I'm trying to rewatch the original series before because I never really was into the original series, but there's so much dialogue about X-Men 97 that I'm getting FOMO again. So it's good. Yeah, thank you for that. Now you're messing with me. I gotta watch it a couple more episodes after I finish with this podcast.
Nice. You'll enjoy it. I think if you're as much of a nerd as me, I think you're gonna like it.
Right. I've had to avoid any talk about it on the internets because I'm trying not to spoil too much of myself. But let's move on. Speaking of the internets and contacting people and being on social media and all that kind of stuff, why don't you plug your social media, your websites, your publications? Let people know where they can find you.
Yeah. So, you can find all the stuff related to my podcast at underratedmoviepodcast.com. You can Underrated Movie Podcast on all the socials. So, like Instagram, Threads, whatever's left of Twitter. Like you can find it on all those places. You can also, check me out I write for freelance for places like watchmojo.com. I've worked for Film Threat, so you can find me there. If you just want to look up Derick McDuff on any of those sites. All my stuff will come up. But the main thing is underratedmoviepodcast.com, Underrated Movie Podcast on all the socials. And however you're listening to this, if you just punch in Underrated Movie Podcast, my podcast will come up.
Awesome. That is fantastic. So, Derick, my man, we are going to transition. We're going to go to the opening credits. Tell the audience what we're going to talk about.
So yeah, today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite films, Amadeus. Amadeus is a look into the life and times of one of the greatest musicians of the Western world. In his time, in the latter half of the 18th century, he set Europeans on fire with his prolific works and his incredible range. To match his level of musical genius, he led a scandalous lifestyle, and his exploits became legendary, inspiring indignation and envy amongst his peers. Was it enough spite to have him murdered, or was his amazing life cut short by his own excesses? Let's take a look at the unparalleled life of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. Which version of the film that you watched? Because I only could find the director's cut. Apparently that's the only thing that's available on streaming.
Yeah, I watched the director's cut too. That's the version that I'm a lot more familiar with. I think that's the version that's pretty much, kind of universally accepted as being the one you should watch. Like it's kind of hard to even find, like you said, the original 1984 cut. I think that was released in theaters.
Right. The original theatrical cut. It was longer than I expected. I don't think I've watched the entire movie all the way through before. I think that when I originally watched it, it was kind of on like in the background. So there are only certain scenes that I remember. I obviously remember the laugh. I remember him playing around with his fiance, and I remember the burial. Those are the ones that were most impactful. And then everything in the middle was kind of a mishmash. So watching this movie was almost like watching it for the first time.
There you go.
So this movie was released September 19th, 1984, produced by the Saul Zentz Company and AMLF. It grossed over $51 million in the US and Canada on a reported budget of $80 million. So that's very economical. If you translate that to today's dollars, that would be that it grossed over $154 million on a $54 million budget. So yeah, it was great. It was a hit. Made almost 3 times its budget. They spent only exactly what they needed to spend, and it didn't go overboard. And the movie looks fantastic. It looks great. And that's what I appreciate about that. It's like they managed to be economical and at the same time make it look fantastic. That's what the theater is all about.
Yeah, and that's like 54 million. That's what would be kind of like a mid-budget movie. That those movies that are kind of disappearing nowadays. Honestly, like you get a lot of your like A24s, your movies made for $20 million or less, or you get your like your big blockbuster superhero movies made for hundreds of millions of dollars. But the ones that are in the middle, that like these interesting period dramas and these movies that are like, they're not cheap, but they're not crazy expensive either. Those are becoming less and less common, which is kind of a shame because there's some good ones. Like you get some good stuff. Like, and you said like this movie, I know we'll get into it a little bit in trivia. I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but like this movie looks so good. Because it's shot with natural lighting. Yeah. Phenomenal.
Right. The other thing is that with the way they make movies now, it's like producers and directors have more options. Like, you could make it for a big studio company, or you could just sell it to a streaming company. And I think that's what's happening to a lot of the mid-budget movies, like especially your rom-coms or your dramas. They're just being bought up by the streaming services. That's why you don't necessarily get a chance to watch it in theaters. So I remember famously, there was the remake of Roadhouse. I almost forgot it. Roadhouse, the director had a chance to put it in movies, but Amazon said, "Yo, we want to buy that joint," and the director said, "All right." And then I think he realized that it was better than what he was expecting, I guess. And he realized he could have released this in theaters, and he was kind of like mad at Amazon because they didn't release it in theater. But it's like, you sold it to Amazon, son. That's how it goes sometimes.
No, totally. Because like another one I think it was like the movie that I covered with, I think that you're going to be your guest coming up here, Quinn Q, talked about Young Woman in the Sea over on my Patreon. And like, that's a movie that like Disney like released that would have been like their bread and butter in like the 90s, like that would have been big, prestigious Disney, like, whatever. But like now Disney's like, putting out like Marvel, Star Wars, like all their IPs, even like through Fox, like Alien and stuff like that. Now it's like that was one that was made and planned to go to originally Disney Plus. They got really good reviews, and they're like, well, let's put this thing out in theaters. But even then, it got like a very, very limited release.
Right. That's what happens.
Like,
right.
Yeah. So even the companies that are putting movies out in the theaters, they're like, the mid-budget movies are like, they'll just put that on Disney Plus, or when they do put it out, it's like, yeah, we'll put it on like a couple of theaters, very limited run. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad there are companies like A24s that are still doing like smaller movies. I think they're creeping up with their budgets now. They're not always like $20 or $30 million. I think they're starting to creep into the $50 million range, and they are consistently putting out good movies, or at least they're really good at just marketing their good movies in there. They're not necessarily talking about the movies that aren't doing as well. So they're able to control the narrative and at least have people believe that most of their movies are quality movies. But I like most of the movies that A24 has put out so far.
Yeah, they make a lot of good stuff. This year they put out Civil War, which I think there's a $50 million budget, which this is their highest budget for any movie. So
yeah, absolutely. So let's go on and talk about who starred in the movies, or in this movie.
Yes,
who's in Amadeus? Tell us who was in Amadeus. Not all of the movies that were. Just this movie.
just this one. All right, that I can manage. So, starring in this movie, in the main role, despite the title, is F. Murray Abraham as Antonio Salieri, who you may recognize from the Grand Budapest Hotel and another few other Wes Anderson movies. He's got a small but important role in 13 Ghosts, and he is in Last Action Hero, which is a great cameo and reference to this film.
Absolutely. That's the main reason I put this in. Because
I saw that. I always think of that every time
Right. That's exactly why. Because I think of that same thing. It was like, that's the guy that killed Salieri.
You can't trust him. He killed Mozart. Okay. Like it's such a good that movie. I love Last Action Hero. Like it's so meta, and that's one of the greatest meta jokes in it. Right.
Absolutely. Let's see. I think I was confused that Abraham got the top billing for this movie. And then I realized that this movie is not necessarily about Mozart. It's about Salieri's impression of Mozart. This is his story that he's telling about Mozart. And because it's his story telling the story from his point of view, that's why he got top billing. I was like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. A movie starts with him and it ends with him. Is him telling the story.
Exactly. It's like Nick Carraway in The Great Gatsby.
I totally missed that movie, but the other people in the audience would catch a reference. It's another movie that I know I need to watch.
See, that was my favorite book as a kid.
Right,
so,
right.
The movie's pretty good too. I'm a sucker for Leo.
Right.
But the book, this is my favorite.
Awesome. Up next is Tom. How do you say this? Hulse or Hulse?
I think it's Hulse is, I believe.
Hulse. We're going to go with that. I'm going to trust you. So Tom Hulse plays Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He's also been in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the 1996 animation, National Lampoon's Animal House, and Parenthood. So he's been in several other things. Other than that, he's been in some TV shows, but I would not recognize him if I don't see it, right? It's not.
Yeah, no.
It's not one of those recognizable faces, but he's been around. He's a working actor.
Yeah, he's a guy, he's the guy who crops up and stuff,
right.
Like I think, like you said, like his biggest role after this was one where he was in animation, so you wouldn't even recognize him. He's Quasimodo, of course, in Hunchback, the Disney version, which I have not seen since I was a kid, but I remember loving it. Elizabeth Berridge as Constance Mozart, who might know from Hidalgo, The Fun House, and Broke Even. So another actor that I'm like, okay, like I think other than F. Murray Abraham, there's not a lot of dudes in this. Maybe one or two, but like there's not a lot of people that you would recognize from stuff.
I recognize a couple of these guys. For like the next guy, I don't recognize him by face, but I recognize one of his credits. So Roy Dotrice, and he played Leopold Mozart. And so the funny thing is that so I'm looking up his credits, and he's been in Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. I was like, okay, I don't remember him. And The Cutting Edge, and I was like, okay, I never seen that one. And then, but what I know him most is from, he narrated most of the books from A Song of Fire and Ice book series, books 1 through 5. After,
which is all that's out so far.
Yeah, well, I think there was one book that he didn't get to narrate because he had passed away after that book was published. So he didn't get to, he didn't get to narrate that. And if you don't know, dear friends, The Song of Fire and Ice is the Game of Thrones book series. The name of the first book is called A Game of Thrones. And that's and he actually had a small part in the TV show as well. But I listened to all of those books, and his voice acting is amazing. He is able to sound like, these books have like dozens of characters, and he's able to distinguish himself as a different character whenever he reads the books. He'll have on different accents, different octaves, different rhythms. It's like you're getting an entire world with just his one voice, and it's fascinating. He was an incredible talent.
That's really cool. Yeah, and he's honestly pretty great in this, just kind of as the imposing
right
dark evil father figure. Dun, 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 you get it. No, he's great.
Yeah.
But next up, we got Simon Cowell as Callow, not Simon Cowell. Simon Callow as, and I'm gonna struggle with this one. Emmanuel Schneider. You got to help me out with this one. I don't know.
Hold on. So it starts off with SCH. I usually spell that like school starts that way. So we can pronounce it that way. And then there's a LI. So skill. Candor. We'll go with that one.
Skillcandor. Skillcandor. That sounds right. I think I heard this. Yeah. All right. Emmanuel Skillcandor. Thank you. From 4 Weddings and a Funeral, A Room with a View, and Shakespeare in Love.
Right. And now, my dear audience, we don't know if that's how you say his name. We're guessing. Yeah. We're guessing.
We might be wrong. I got to consult the tape on that one.
Up next is Christine Ebersole. She plays Katerina Cavalier. See, I'm messing up now. Cavalier. Oh, Cavalieri. Okay, that sounds right. Katrina Cavalieri. She played also on The Wolf of Wall Street, Richie Rich, and Black Sheep. I liked her in this movie. She was fun.
Yeah. She's pretty good. She's good. She's in the beginning. She comes back in the end of it a little bit.
Right.
Yep. All right. Next up, we got a big old creep, Jeffrey Jones, who plays Emperor Joseph II, who is from Howard the Duck, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Ed Wood, and also one I noticed he didn't have on here, Beetlejuice.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that is correct.
He's in Beetlejuice. Of course, he's not going to be in Beetlejuice 2 because, as I mentioned, this guy sucks. We don't need to go into it, but look him up. He's kind of a big old creep, like I mentioned.
I thought he didn't pass away. He's just a creep now. I couldn't.
No, It's bad. It's real bad. He's been a creep since like 2002. There's a reason you don't see him in movies anymore.
Right.
He's not a guy. He's not a good guy.
Here's the thing, right? I'll go ahead and say that he was good in this movie, and I generally enjoy him in the movies that I wrote. And I think I remember reading about him, but I can't remember what he's done, and I don't need us to remind the audience of what he's done. But I was like, I remember typing this up, and I was like, wait a minute, is this guy a creep now? Is he one of those guys? Is he like a who am I thinking of? Is he like the captain from Star Trek, the motion picture? Is he like that guy? Oh. I'm pretty sure that's his
one
issue.
Of those. He's one of those
creeps. Yeah. He's creeping out. And
big old creep, but like I said, he's was good in the 80s.
Right.
Ferris Bueller.
Right. He's gone all. I forgot his name. Never mind. We don't have to go into it. But up next is Charles Kay. He played Count Orsini Rosenberg. He's also been in The Importance of Being Earnest and Fall of Eagles.
Very nice. And then we've got someone who I believe was only in the director's cut. I think his scenes were cut out of the theatrical, and that's Kenneth McMillan playing Michael Schulenberg, who is people might know as the villain in a movie I know you love, Dune, the 1984 version, and Runaway Train.
Right. And Dune, he was Vladimir Harkonnen. Baron.
Yes.
And he was. It was interesting seeing him in this film, not hamming it all the way up, right? It was just kind of playing. He's not doing the milk this cat. Just kind of playing a regular dude, just a regular, incredibly wealthy dude. And and actually, if those were the scenes that were added to fill out fill out the director's cut, then I enjoyed that. Like, I enjoy when you put scenes that add meaning to the narrative. I don't like when they add scenes just to be adding stuff to the, just make it longer. Like, you can't just make it longer. They have to add meaning. And his scenes definitely added meaning to the movie. And I like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I just actually did a whole mini series on, I called it Extended Editions about director's cuts and, underrated director's cuts. And like, why? I feel like there's different kinds of director's cuts. There's some that are like, okay, some that you're just adding some scenes to kind of like flesh it out a little bit. But there's some that are like, oh, this is like a scene that really adds to the experience. And I feel like all the scenes that are, because I've seen the theatrical cut one time, I was kind of like surprised at the stuff that wasn't in it, because it's still a great movie. But I'm like, oh, you're losing a lot of great context from the director's cut. So I'll probably get into more of that later. But yeah, I think that there's really pivotal scenes that get put back in.
Right. Oh, and finally we have Kenny Baker. He plays the parody commendator. Oh shoot! Now I'm messing up again. I know that it's a foreign word for commander, but I'm not exactly sure if it's Italian. It's probably Italian. Commendatore. I think you're supposed to pronounce the E. I think that's where it was tripped me up. So Kenny Baker plays the parody Commendatore, and it's a tiny part. And people, well, why would you put such a tiny part in this opening credit sequence? Because you have to. Because it's Kenny Baker, and he was in Time Bandits, and he was in Star Wars, and you probably
he's R2D2.
He's R2D2. You're wondering, what did he do in Star Wars? He's R2D2 all the way up, I think, until he was even R2D2 in the first J.J. Abrams film. I think he was R2D2, and that's wild because he's a very old man by now.
He's getting up there.
And they can make an actual R2D2. Like, you don't have to put an old man in a costume in R2D2. So I'm not exactly sure. Maybe he wasn't in the J.J. Abrams. Maybe he was up until like the in the sequel. What are they, sequels? And the prequels. The prequel trilogy, he was definitely in those. And even then, it was like, he just bring that old man back to work, right?
Right. Well, he did pass away, I guess, in 2016. So he would not have been in the sequels. Yeah.
Right. So he wasn't in the J.J. Abrams then. But
I guess he was. Okay. It says, yeah, I guess that was his final role, was The Force Awakens.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
Looking at
feels unnecessary. I guess they felt like, let's bring him back. Let's give this guy some money.
Right.
We got to bring him back.
We got to do it.
Right. For old time's sake. It's tradition. Yeah. It's tradition to have him in that little robot body. He may not be comfortable in it, but come on now. It's Kenny Baker. We got to do it.
Right. We got to do it.
All right. Tell us who the director was.
So the director is Milos Forman, who, I am a big fan of his works. You may know him from his movies One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, The People versus Larry Flint, Man on the Moon, another one of my favorite movies, Ragtime, and Hair.
Right. Out of all of these movies, I've only seen Amadeus and Man on the Moon.
I mean, honestly, in my opinion, those are the two best. Like, I think you're doing well. Like, I think you probably should at some point watch One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because like, it's kind of a classic. It's like it's like a seminal work. It's great Jack Nicholson, and it's like it's got Danny DeVito when he still had hair in it, which is wild. But it's good. But I think Man on the Moon and Amadeus are like two of my favorite movies. Yeah.
I definitely want to check that out. This movie was written by Peter Shaffer, based on his play, and Zdeněk Mahler. And Shaffer, he's also written Equus and The Public Eye, but most of his works are plays. And then Mahler is uncredited, and he wrote The Butcher of Prague and The Skywriters. So, and I think in the director's edition, it's called Peter Shaffer's Amadeus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's a guy who, like, he's a playwright. You know, his only film credits are adaptations of his plays, like this and Equus.
Right. And which is as it should be. It's like, I don't know nothing about films. I just write plays. Leave me alone.
Yeah. There you go. We'll get a second screenwriter to, like, write some stuff in that, like, for the film medium. But yeah, this is a really good adaptation of a play. Like, I think it's very well done. Right.
Now, before you get into the next one, this is going to be the music segment. Now, the way it's written in IMDb, because I had written out the notes before I actually watched the movie, it's a little confusing because normally in IMDb, it'll just say music by or music composed by, and they'll have like the main music guy. But they didn't have like the main music guy listed as such. So I just wrote down all of the composers. And then later on, when I watched the film, then I found out who the main music guy was. So just go ahead and go over the music.
Okay, yeah. Music obviously by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, uncredited. But then you also have Laszlo Heltny as the conductor of the Academy Chorus of St. Martin in the Fields. Neville Mariner, conductor / music supervisor. John McCarthy as conductor. Ambrosia Opera Chorus. Simon Preston as conductor. The Choirsters of Westminster Abbey, and Mark Growls as conductor. The Brussels Virtuosi, uncredited.
Right. So, and it should have been, there was a clue there. So as it turns out, Neville Mariner, or Sir Neville Mariner, excuse me, thank you very much. He's also listed as the music supervisor. So when you look on the credit, he's basically the main guy, the main composer of this movie. And then I didn't have written down what John Strauss was the music coordinator. So he's the guy going around coordinating all of these conductors and all of their music. And of course, the music was by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who is uncredited in his own movie. So that's fascinating. I guess they were like, well, the people know who he is. We don't have to get into all of that.
Well, it's interesting because this movie, this year at the Oscars, the 85 Oscars, because, celebrating the movies from 84, this movie cleaned up. It won 8 Oscars, and obviously one it was not eligible for was Best Original Score, which went to Passage from India. And the composer, his name escapes me, who won that award, was just like, I'm really glad Mozart was not eligible this year. Said that on stage in his acceptance speech.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like you're like a brand new pop star going up against like Prince with Prince's album. Just so happened to not be eligible that year. So, you won on a technicality. So that's it for the opening credits. I don't have really that many announcements except that I was recently a guest on Hodgepodge with Rob Fredette podcast. And we talked about JFK. And there's something I want to say. I've been watching a lot of really long movies lately, and I just really want to watch something that's kind of short. So, and I wasn't prepared. Like each time I watch these long movies, I wasn't prepared. So, before I watched Malcolm X, and Malcolm X was like 3 hours and 20 minutes long. And it's like, this is a movie that I had wanted to watch. I watched it for Juneteenth, and I had a guest on, and I had a really fun time for the episode. But it's like, and it was a good movie, but I did feel that it was longer than it absolutely needed to be. And I was thinking to myself as I was watching the movie, this could have been a montage. Like there were a lot of scenes that either went longer than they absolutely necessary, or it could have been a montage. And it was just Spike Lee wanting to make an epic, but there was and all the scenes I felt were necessary, but I think that some of the scenes could have been truncated. And similar feelings about JFK. I mean, I like JFK. They had a lot of it was just, if somebody wanted to sit down and talk about all the conspiracies around JFK. That's what this movie is. It's just a guy put on this tinfoil hat on. It's like, okay, this is really what happened. I got all the evidence right here. And that's basically the whole movie, except in dramatic form. And so I liked all of that. And so there were like very few parts in that movie that I didn't feel that were like necessary for the movie to get its point across. And I think it's just that, I forgot his name, the director of that movie. I think he's better at directing longer movies than Spike Lee is. And then we got this movie, Mozart. Also kind of long. Just going to come out there and say it, kind of long. They were there, and I understand the necessity of the length. I know what they were doing in this, like, because they really wanted to get as much of his music in the movie as possible. But once again, you know, there could have been a couple of montages taken.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
Turn your dial to find the frequency of the past.
Captain Advice.
Where the classic stories of mysteries, sci-fi, thrillers, and suspense are found waiting to be heard once again.
Another case for Nick Carter, Master Detective.
You'll find a variety of those stories here, in their original form, where each episode takes you to another place or time.
The Man of Bronze, Doc Savage.
But only when you find the mystery frequency. Available everywhere.
The shadow knows.
We're going to talk about 5 of our favorite parts of the movie. But before we talk specifically about our favorite parts, why don't you tell us about, Derick, tell us about how you came across this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of it, and I was like, well, I couldn't even remember when I saw it for the first time, because I know I've watched it so many times over the course of my life. And the earliest time I can remember watching it was I had a really good friend back in like high school / college who was a musician. And I remember watching this like with a bunch of people over at her house, which is like, because like this isn't really like a party kind of movie, you know, like, but like she loved music so much and she put it on. And I remember just being like, oh my God, like incredibly moved. And over the years, like it's been one of my favorite films. I've rewatched it so many times. One of the coolest times I got to watch it was I actually live here in Southern California, and I went down. They were doing a thing where they were playing it at the Hollywood Bowl with a live orchestra, orchestrating all whenever there was any of the Mozart or, you know, the Salieri part, like the classical music would play. The LA Philharmonic was actually there playing it, and that was such a cool experience.
That sounds fantastic. That's definitely a way to experience this movie. It's like, then you get the fullness of the music that you would not be able to get in a movie theater. So that's fascinating. Did they have like the opera there too? Like the people like a chorus singing, or were they just playing the instrumental parts?
I think it was just the instrumental parts
right.
That they had. But I think they had a couple vocalists, but they didn't have like a full opera or anything. So like whenever like, you know, like they would be in somebody like would, you know, do it or they would have like somebody doing that or something.
Right. I think I came across this movie. I don't know. I think it just so happened to be on TV, and I like you know, history stuff every once in a while. I was like, ooh, Amadeus, I've heard so much about him. Let me go watch this movie. And, but like I said, I think it was kind of on in the background, but I remember liking it. There are certain scenes that I remember, that are impactful that I still remember. So that's one of the reasons that this movie was on the list. I was like, it's high time I visited this movie. I just didn't realize it was 3 whole hours long.
It's a long one. It's a time commitment.
Yeah, definitely. And see, that's the thing about it. It wasn't so much that I was worried about, you know, like being bored or anything like that. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to, this is going to be a 3-hour commitment. It's like from this time to this time, I have to plan for this. I just can't plop down and put it on. It's not a comedy. It's not a half-hour TV show where I can, just, okay, that's done. I can move into do something else. This is more like, I gotta work out. I gotta do like a mental workout. It's like, okay, nah, I'm doing this now. Cause like when I watch movies, I don't want to be distracted. I don't want to get up and use the bathroom. I don't want to be disturbed. I don't want anyone talking to me while the movie is on. I want to be totally committed to the screen. So that's my thing. So it's like,
I think that's admirable, honestly, because so many people will be like on their phones or something. Like I always am like, all right, I'm going to try and watch this, you know, like without my roommate or anything, so I can just focus. Nobody's talking to me. So yeah, I totally get you.
Yeah. When I'm watching a movie with somebody and they suddenly pull out their phone, like this is just at home, just not like at the movie theater. It's me at home, and then you know, I'm with somebody and they start pulling out their phone. We're supposed to be watching the movie together. I get all, you know, Greta Thunberg going. I'm like, how dare you? How dare you? Like I get all like that. Or like I'll hear people talking on podcasts about how they pulled out their phones or how they have to be chastised for pulling out their phones.
I even feel bad taking out my phone to take notes on the movie, you know? Like I'm always just like, I'm watching it, I promise. This is for the podcast.
Right. Yeah, I have to take notes because I'm doing it for the podcast. So I usually take notes on my tablet. So I have to do that. But and even that I'm kind of, you know, doing it begrudgingly, but it's just a task that has to be done because like Sam Beckett, I have a Swiss cheese memory and I'm not going to remember anything after this is over. So notes have to be taken. So that being said, why don't you start us off? What's one of your 5 favorite parts?
So I'll say, you know, we talked a lot about how, like, you know, this is a 3-hour movie, how, you know, this is the director's cut, which added 20 minutes, and a lot of those minutes added were important, very contextual. And one of the ones that got added that I want to mention is the scene where Salieri asks Constance Mozart to come back. He's like, come back later in the night. That is the price. And she shows back up. That was actually cut from theaters. So, and I think the reason is because there's boobs in it. And they were like, it's 1984. We're scandalized, you know, whatever. But I think that's a great scene, and it really does so much to build both of those characters up. Like, and you understand both of them so much more. You understand Salieri because he just like wants to be he wants to just do everything in Mozart. Like he's so jealous. He wants to kind of like the way that Mozart slept with his great love. You're like, maybe he's trying to like sleep with Mozart, you great love or whatever, get revenge in some way. But then he ends up like ringing the bell and kind of like wishing her away because he's like, I can never do it, you know? And that informs later on in the movie. Like if you don't have that scene, the scene at the end where she shows up and she like is like, oh, it's this guy. I hate this guy. You could see it in her face. It doesn't hit as hard. Right. And then that line she gives, she's like, you'll have to leave. I'm sorry. I don't have a servant to show you out. You're like, that line hit is just like a whatever line in the theatrical, but in the director's cut, you're like, oh my gosh, that harkens back to him like ringing the bell, showing her out. That's an example of a scene that was added back in that really helps the movie out, I think.
And it also makes you suspect that she might know that their servant was a spy.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's Cynthia
That's
Nixon.
The one thing that I thought. I was like, does she know? And that was I didn't realize that was one of the parts that was added. And when I was watching it, I was like, oh, I don't remember boobies.
Exactly. Because I had the opposite effect, right? Because when I saw this at the bowl, I was like, where's the boobies?
Right,
you know?
right,
They
right,
cut out
right.
the boobies, you know? And I was like, oh, it's theatrical. There's no boobies in that.
Right. And so that was a powerful scene also because it's not so much as that he wanted to be Mozart in a way that he wanted to act like Mozart. What it was is that he perceived Mozart hurting him. So he wanted to hurt Mozart back. But Mozart didn't do it on purpose. Like he didn't know that chick and he were together. He didn't know. And I don't think he was the type of dude that would try to take somebody else's girl. He just saw a girl. He saw an opportunity and he slept with her. But they never actually said that he did. It's just Salieri's conviction that they slept together. And
I knew the creature.
Right. The creature had her, right? Yeah. So it was based on his belief that they slept together. And but whether it happened or it didn't happen, it's not something that they call him Wolfie in the movie, which is so funny. That Wolfie didn't know, right? So he basically his perception is kind of like a garbage perception. Like his girlfriend knew. So, or it's not even his girlfriend. That's the thing about it. It's just somebody he liked, right?
Exactly.
It's like Wolverine and Jean Grey all over again, right? It's not like he professed her love to this woman. It's just some woman that he knew that he liked. She probably doesn't even know that he likes her in that way.
Yeah.
And he's
just like trying to be all chaste and
right.
Yeah.
It's like, ain't nobody asked you to be chaste. And it's like, you're not a priest. You know, you're not
he's not a monk.
Right. You're not a monk. You could have this woman. You could have proposed, and apparently in real life they really did get together. But it's just funny how in the movie kind of he's all jealous and angry. He feel like he been cheated on when in fact it's like it's not even his business, right?
Right? Yeah, exactly.
But either of them does. And so in that scene where he has Mozart's wife, he wants revenge on something he doesn't even have a right to vengeance. And I think that the reason he sent her away is that he came to that realization is like for one thing, he's not that dude, right? He's not that dude he doesn't have the cojones, I guess, to do that sort of thing. He's not as he's evil, but he's not that evil. It's like there are certain limits to what he's willing to do. And he just wasn't capable of doing that thing. And the other thing is that, like I said, it's, I think there was a certain amount of shame and embarrassment on his part, and that's why he sent her away. But
I think he also wanted to kind of like embarrass her too. You know, like I think it is that. Like I think that's why he doesn't just send her away. He rings the bell. Right.
Yeah, I think that he couldn't go through with sleeping with her, so instead he settled on embarrassing her, which is just to. And then at the end of the movie, like you say, you see why she hated him so much.
Yeah.
Because even I forgot. I was like, I forgot. And it was like, oh yeah, that's right. He did that thing. He, as they say on TikTok, he essayed her.
Yep, exactly.
So one of my favorite parts is, they're the costumes. The costumes were, outstanding. They're fantastic. I love like a good costume. I'm deep into science fiction and fantasy and period pieces, and I really enjoy when they put the work into the costuming and it's like just little details that I notice now that I wouldn't notice before. Like in one scene, Mozart, and he's wearing these shoes. And in the shoes, just the back heel of the shoe is red. Like the shoe is black, but the back heel of the shoe is red. And I was like, well, that's fancy. That's a pretty fancy thing. And then the wigs that absolutely everybody wore were out, just outrageous. Yeah, is what I would put it as, the outrageous wigs. So yeah, I like the effort they put into the costuming of this movie.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like it's definitely like one of those costume porn movies, where you just watch and you're like, you could watch this movie on mute and just be like, look at how like amazing everyone looks. Like they've got the crazy wigs and like, the corsets and like, and that's just like them walking around. Then you also have like the people on stage dressed up like birds and like, demons flying around and like, and the John Giovanni character. So like, much like, I think it reminds me a lot of a character who, by the way, gets shouted out by name in this movie, Marie Antoinette, is another movie that's like just great costume porn.
Right.
I think it falls in that same category of just like, wow, looking at like how all these people look. And then, when you see Mozart like with his wig and like dressed up and like, conducting, when you see him like laid low and he's like kind of drunk and he's got a lazy eye and he's talking to the guy from Dune and it's just like, hey, can you give me some money? And like, you're like, oh, it really hits even more that he's looks so bad, after you've seen him in these cool costumes. Right.
Yeah. He goes back to, burn Harkonnen for some money. Harkonnens don't give up their money.
Right. He's like, please. And he's like, sorry, dude.
It was sad and pathetic because he goes to the dude and the dude he's like, does your daughter need any lessons? He's like, my daughter's married and living in another city. What do you? Yeah. And that was super sad, but I guess it's something that had to happen. It was like he was suffering from consumption and basically his own hubris, right? Where he wouldn't basically submit in a way that was necessary for him to be wealthy, I guess, or at least financially subsistent on it by his own means instead of like going into debt and whatnot.
Right. And another thing too, speaking of like, him going into debt and him like losing his wealth, something I didn't really clock before this viewing was when at that last scene when, his wife comes back to his house, there's just like the house is barren. Like he's sold off like everything. You can like see the marks on the walls where like, this used to be a cabinet here. There used to be a picture here. Like they're all just like, you can see like the markings of just like, here's where it used to be. And you're like, wow, because, Cynthia Nixon, the spy, character like mentions like, oh, he's been selling off these snuff boxes. But then by then it's clearly gone way beyond that. He's selling off like everything he owns because he is just broke.
Right. When they came back to that scene, I thought he had moved. It's like, he ain't there. He's at Salviori's house. And it's like, oh no, he is home. And it's like, everything is gone.
Yep. Absolutely.
So what's another one of your favorite parts?
So another one of my favorite part is just kind of the themes of like obsession and Salieri's whole driving motivation because he realizes he has the ability, as he puts it, to see greatness, but not to create it. And that's something that, that whenever I watch that, I'm just always like, man, that it hits a different way, like you don't want to really relate to Salieri, but you kind of do, because you're kind of like, especially like me being like a critic or just like whenever like you're a creative type, you always get doubts and stuff like that, imposter syndrome, what have you. And you see somebody out there, you're like, man, like I see like Damien Chazelle or something. I'm like, that dude made La La Land when he was 31 years old. Like, man, how did, and you see it and you're like, oh, it's so good. And I see how good it is. And if I had just made something like that, and like Salieri, he just, this obsession that he gets where he's like, he wants just a piece of it, right? He's like, I just want a piece of it. And how that kind of becomes his like, quote unquote, war with God, I think is so fascinating. He's just like, God put the desire in my heart, but not the ability. And because people like see Salieri and they're like, yeah, you're good, whatever. But he like, the idiot emperor is like, yeah, he's the best. And Salieri's like, I know I'm not as good as Mozart. I just give me the chance to be as good as Mozart. And because it's, and he's like, he thinks Mozart should be this great, like regal, and then he meets him and he's just this farting buffoon who's just like rolling around and being dirty and saying dirty words and like, like having sex and all this stuff. And he's just like, what? I tried to be this great paradigm of virtue and chastity, and I still can't do any of this. And I love that that's like the kind of motivation for the whole film.
Right. He's definitely the worst kind of hater. In modern parlance. Like he loves Mozart, but because he recognized Mozart's a genius, but he wanted to be that dude, and he felt that in order to be that dude that everybody loved, he had to be virtuous and pious and all of these things. And you had, like you said, Mozart, like the exact opposite of him, and given all of the talent, like literally all of the talent, like writing operas at the age of 12 or something like that. Just right. And he's like super duper jealous of that. So that was the crux of the film, and that made the film great. That was just basically the great thing about the film, and probably the play that it was based on. And I want to jump on top of that. One of my favorite parts is let's see, so this is when this is basically the scene right here where the emperor is Emperor Joseph II, or is it Joseph? I don't know. I don't remember what his name is. It's something like that. It's like, Joseph II. It's funny because it's like, Joseph, that's such a normal name for an emperor. And then he's in Germany. He's in Venice. I guess they speak German there. And
Austria. Yeah.
Austria. You're right. So Joseph, right? But anyways, so it's Mozart's first meeting with the emperor. The emperor is thinking about employing Mozart. And so he has Salieri write. Well, Salieri wrote an entrance song by himself. He wrote an entrance theme, and the emperor was like, can I play it? It was like, oh God, no, you can't play it. Obviously you can't say that to the emperor. So it's like, yes, right. Yes, sire, go ahead. And the emperor just starts butchering this song. And that was so funny. Yeah. He's just all the wrong notes, the wrong key, just wrong tempo, just barely able to play I guess that's a harpsichord or whatever that thing was. It was just, he's just ruining it. And, Mozart coming in and meeting everybody. And then they said, and then Mozart had boasted that, probably not even a boast, but everybody around him saw it as a boast, that he knows what the entrance song is. He was like, why don't you take this music? It's like, no, it's in my head. I already know it. And it's like, yeah, well, show us that you know. So he sits down at the piano or harpsichord, at the percussion instrument, since I don't know what it is. And then he starts playing it. And then it was like, wait a minute, it just kind of goes over and over. Let me put some flourishes in there. Then he starts fixing the song that he had just heard. And it's like, you can see the expression on Salieri's face. That was just like priceless. It's like, let me come on here and fix your horrible song for you because it's so bad. And he had this song that you had so much pride in, that you stayed up all night composing. You spent all night writing this garbage, and I just fixed it for you. I made it better. You're welcome.
In like 2 seconds, he's like, dude, like, oh man, that's such a good scene, because it's like Salieri, he's seen Mozart, he's like, kind of like, this guy really is like, you know what, but like, whatever. He's a buffoon, but he's obviously talented. And then Mozart kind of like slights him a little bit, because he's like, oh, let me fix this. And he kind of like, a quaint tune, and like Salieri, because Mozart's just kind of like being a braggadocious idiot. Like, he's not like meaning any offense, but
right. Like, he's not doing it on purpose. That's just kind of how he is. Right? Yeah. He doesn't really know how to control his impulse. It's like, wait a minute, this could be better, couldn't it? Right?
And then, because that's Salieri's been like, it could be better. And he just, like, this thing I worked so hard on, he didn't even try. He just fixed it. And
right.
Like, it's like, that's kind of like one of the big starting points for his like whole feud with him.
Right.
One-sided feud, but yeah.
Yeah. Once, like, because Mozart has no idea what's going on. He's
like,
completely
there's
clueless.
only one moment at the end where he's like, I thought you maybe didn't like my work, or me.
That's exactly right. That's really funny, because throughout, it's like, this is probably the only movie I've seen where the protagonist does not know who his antagonist is. He doesn't even really understand that he has antagonists, right? It's like, because it's just antagonist that starts all these rumors that he's touching children. It's antagonist that it basically tries to separate him from the emperor. Is like, and he doesn't know that it's Salieri doing all of these things. He's just accepting that these are things that are happening to him, and he's just trying to navigate all of these difficulties as best he could. Like, he has his own flaws that gets in the way, but it's just funny that he doesn't know. Like, he dies never knowing that Salieri has caused all this to happen to him, which is fascinating.
Right, yeah. And dying, like right at the moment when Salieri could have a piece of his glory, and then like a Salieri puts it, he's like, God would rather destroy his servant than allow me to share it. Like, it's just such a, you're like, oh man, it's such a perfect ending. Yeah.
Right. Another one. Oh no, you go ahead. I just did that. That was just, I was gonna say, yeah,
part. like kind of riffing on that about how, Salieri is the one who's kind of behind the scenes puppeteering everything and making all these things not happen for Mozart. One of the ones that he does is he says, through my influence, I made sure it only played 5 times. He's talking about Don Giovanni, which is the one where like that's inspired by Mozart's dead father, where it's like, he comes in with a big black cape and it's like all operatic, and the people in the audience don't seem to be getting it. But Salieri, he's like, but I saw each of those 5 performances, and because he is simultaneously being like, I'm going to destroy this little man, and I love how he says, like, Mozart's little coffin, but like, he's like, I'm gonna wreck this dude, but I'm gonna make sure that this play is only shown 5 times. But he's like, I see that it is a masterpiece, and I'm gonna sit here and enjoy every single second of it.
Right. It's like, it's one of his favorite things in the world, and yet he feels compelled to destroy it or minimize it in some way.
And I love that scene when afterwards, like, Mozart's like, well, what did you think? And Salieri, he just kind of stops, and there's so many, he's conveying so many emotions at once. He's like, I thought it was marvelous. And you can tell he's like, dude, I want to hate this so bad, but it's so good.
Right.
I have to be honest with you, man. This thing rips, Like,
right.
He's just so honest in that moment.
I think that he hates that he has to like it.
Exactly. Like he's just like, dude, like this is incredible, and there's no denying it. And it's he has a couple moments like that, but like the line where he says it was marvelous is the one that really encapsulates it.
Right. But at the same time, Wolfgang has his own flaws, and one of them is that he cannot take criticism. Like all his life, he's been so perfect, right? It's like he comes to believe that he can't commit any flaws, like everything he does is perfect. So when he's offered criticism, like the slightest criticism, he takes offense to it, and he doesn't understand the criticism, and he won't take it, right? So that's
right.
And so that's the kind of the downfall of like one of his plays where the emperor had gotten bored and yawned like near the end of the play. And see, this isn't Salieri's doing. This is just like the problem is that the entire creative artistic society at the time was determined by the king. So the king decided how popular, how long this was going to last. It's like you couldn't have a dissenting opinion from what the emperor had wanted. So the emperor yawned, and then Salieri knew like, oh, that's 9 performances for sure. And it's nothing that Salieri did. Maybe he could have talked it up. It's like, oh, come on, my liege, we can let it play for a couple more weeks. But he didn't interfere in that way. It's like it had nothing to do with him. So had he made the play a little bit shorter, or had he not added so many notes, like too
many notes.
right. The emperor had no idea how to criticize the thing that he didn't like. He didn't know how to communicate. I mean, obviously there was something that he didn't like about it, but he didn't know how to communicate it. And he was like, too many notes. I have no idea what to say to this dude. I mean, it was perfect, but there was one little thing I didn't like about it, and I don't know how to tell you what it is that I didn't like. So yeah, that was a funny thing. Too many notes.
It's funny too, because like Mozart, like he doesn't know how to play the game like at all. Like, you know, the emperor's criticizing him and stuff. And the thing is, like, Mozart like is just defending him. Like he can't take the criticism, but like on a certain level, like Mozart is right. Like, and Salieri knows that Mozart's right. Like he's like the too many notes thing is total BS. But like Mozart, he just can't like accept. Like sometimes, you know what, you got to cut 20 minutes out of the movie and make it a 2-hour, 40-minute movie instead of a 3-hour movie. And you know, that's something that maybe Milos Forman can take. He can take the notes from the studio and cut it out and then put his director's cut version out later. But Mozart can't take that same criticism, even though he's right.
Right. Know? Not only that, but he didn't know how to communicate why it was good. Like he didn't know how to defend his work. It's like, because the only thing he would say, but it's perfect. It was like, no, you gotta give him more than that. It's just perfect. And sometimes he could do that. Like, there was a time when he wanted to do, Figaro, and nobody at the court wanted to do it. It's like, but it's finished. And then he was able to articulate and explain to them and entice them into why he should be able to do Figaro as an opera, even though the emperor had banned it, which is kind of weird, but that's the thing that they could do. I guess from an American perspective, it's a weird thing to just ban something like that. But he had his reasonings. You know, it caused discourse. I guess it caused kind of disruption between, I guess, poor people and rich people. I guess I think that was what I took from the emperor's argument. So I'm like, but Mozart was able to intelligently defend the work and was able to get it produced. So it's like he wasn't consistently able to do that. And had he learned that, you know, maybe he would have, you know, it lasted a couple more weeks.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It would have, you know, maybe played a little bit better if he had just been able to play the game.
Right. Absolutely. So what's your fifth favorite? I think we're on the fifth favorite part. So what's your fifth one?
All right. So I would say my fifth one is the scene where he goes and he burns the cross. That scene, it hits, man. Like, I'm not like a super religious person, you know, like I wasn't raised Catholic or anything, you know, but like that scene when he's like, and God was my enemy. And you just see he's putting the cross in the fire and you're like, oh man, I feel like I should not be watching this movie. Right. Am I gonna is the lightning bolt going to hit me right now? Like, it's just, it's so impactful. It uses this imagery that is so ingrained in just all of us, like in Western culture, of like this crucifix, and he's just like burning, and you're like, this is like crazy and sacrilegious, and it really it gives you the idea of the mindset that Salieri is in, that he is like, just like, I'm declaring war on God right now. Like he is just like out to like this destroy, like, through like he hates Mozart, but it's only because it's like an extension of like, he hates God for like not giving him this ability, but giving him this desire. And that scene, it just really hits. And I'll also say it's shot immaculately. It's shot like the way it's using the fire. It's indicative of like the way this whole movie is shot, by just kind of candlelight, mostly natural lighting, I love a movie that uses natural and available lighting. Another really famous example that's kind of contemporary to this is Barry Lyndon by Stanley Kubrick. There's a lot of great filmmakers that do this. And I think, obviously the Revenant was one from a couple of years back. Terrence Malick did a lot of time. But this is, I think it looks so good.
Right.
Like, and it's so impressive that they're able to light so much of this movie with like fireplaces and candlelight and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can actually tell. There's another recent example of that in The Eternals. Even though I personally thought that there were some scenes that could have used a little bit more lighting, but yeah, the director, she used natural lighting for most of that movie.
I didn't even know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it did lean. It made it a more unique experience and separated from other superhero films, which is one of the reasons, like, I didn't like it as much as most of the other fare. Like, I'll definitely take something like Spider-Man Homecoming over The Eternals, but with all of the fake lighting. But I do appreciate how The Eternals used natural lighting. I did like that. Well, at least I liked the effort and attempt that was made. But in this movie, I guess because it's not just the use of natural lighting, it's where the light is placed. It's like how it's employed. I'm pretty sure that there were some, they used natural lighting, and then they also used some modern techniques, because there are a lot of areas that were very well lit, and which got me thinking, are you sure that's natural lighting? But if it's all natural lighting, then they must have used a lots of like mirrors and whiteboards and stuff like that to get it just right. Because some of those were like perfect. So, my last favorite part that I want to go is these are two parts that kind of dovetail to each other. So one of them is when he's meeting, what's her name? Constance. So when he's not meeting Constance, they're already courting, and they're playing under the table. This is kind of the first scene where you kind of see Mozart. So I'm going backwards to the earlier part of the film, and they're playing this game where he's trying to get her to say stuff backwards, and then get her to guess the things that he's saying backwards. He can say stuff backwards effortlessly, almost like if it was another language. Like in real life, he was pretty much a polyglot. I think he knew at least 3 languages. And I think that most of the upper crust in society in Europe, they knew at least 2 languages. And I think Mozart probably knew 3 or 4. I think that he knew at least French and Italian. So he's speaking backwards, and they're giggling and they're courting, and that's funny. And then he'll say something, and then she'll guess it, and something was like, "Eat my shit" or something like that. And it was So that was that's a fun scene. That's the scene that I remember from when I first watched it. But and that dovetails to it's just one of my favorite parts of the movie is Mozart's laugh. So it's I can't even do it. It's just this goofy laugh that he had. And it's like when people kind of look at him funny when he starts laughing, but that's just his laugh. It's not like he can help how he laughs. And it's funny, and it's alarming. It disarms you. It's unnerving sometimes. It kind of reminds me of 2 things. One, it reminds me of Eddie Murphy's laugh. Cause he kind of, right. He kind of taught himself not to laugh like that anymore. So nowadays when you see him laugh, he's not doing that laugh like he did early in his career. And, it also reminds me of, the Joker, the movie Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, and he had like a delayed laugh, like because he was he had some severe mental issues, so like he was at the nightclub and the comedian's telling a joke, and then Arthur would like laugh like a minute later, like a minute too late, where it was unnerving. So that's the other thing that Mozart's laugh reminds me of. So
it's iconic.
yeah, it's definitely iconic. It definitely makes this movie kind of stand out. It sometimes you're just going to watch it to wait till he laughs next, right? So
right. And I don't know, did you watch if you watch the whole credits, like at the very end, you just hear the like the laugh again, you know?
No, I totally missed that. I didn't watch it all the way to the end because this is the era before post-credit scenes. So that's like a little Easter egg for people who are patient enough to go through all of the credits.
Yeah, every once in a while they would just put in a little thing like that for you back in the day.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, no, but his laugh, it's so like I remember watching this movie maybe like a year or so ago with one of my best friends who was a movie buff, but she'd never seen it. And she was like, yeah, that was a good movie, but man, with that laugh, I get why Salieri wanted to kill him.
Right.
That was the most annoying laugh I've ever heard. It's pretty good.
Right. That's correct. I think that had to have been part of it. It's like, not only is this dude a buffoon, not only like that one of the reasons that Salieri burned the cross is Salieri is putting in work for God. He's doing everything that you could possibly do for God that you would think that God wants. Like he's praying every night. He's on his knees. He's celibate. He's everything. And yet he doesn't have the talent that God gave Mozart, who's doing nothing for the work. As far as he's concerned, Mozart got that talent inappropriately or undeservedly, and he felt that he deserved it. So he was like, "Oh, so this is how you're gonna do me? I'm gonna burn your cross." It's a real Sinead O'Connor moment for Salieri.
Yeah, no, and I think he even has a line where he's like, "That wasn't Mozart. That was God laughing at me." So every time you hear that laugh, it's like it's like God laughing at him. Yeah.
At some point in the movie, you realize that he's not fighting Mozart. Mozart is just a patsy. As far as he's concerned, he's fighting God himself.
I love that. And he's like, "I'm going to destroy this guy," and he's like, "Oh, but he destroyed him first before I get it's so good. It's so freaking good.
Right. Yeah. And at the end of the movie, he calls himself like the Lord of Mediocrity, right?
Yes. Oh, that was good. That was another one I had written down. Was that last scene where like he's just kind of broken the priest, and it's great because you can tell they've talked throughout the whole night. Because it's when when the priest first comes in, it's like it's light out, you know,
right?
And then in like the middle of the movie, it's dark, and then the end of the movie, it's light out again. They're like, "We're gonna take you to breakfast." So like he's been telling the story all night, and he broke the priest. The priest is like, he's like, "You're mediocrity," like, and he just goes through, and there's all the people like chained up and stuff, and he's like, "I absolve you. I'm the patron saint." He calls himself the patron saint of mediocrity.
Right.
It's so good. It's like you're just like, man, I've been there where it's like you feel like, yeah, I'm just like whatever, and he's just going, "I absolve you. None of us are ever going to be Mozart." I love that scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's one of the things I can't get out of my head is there's one dude that's chained up by his neck. There's one guy in a tiny little cage. He's in a really bad. That's back when you had mental institutions. That was a for real terrible place to be if you had mental issues. If you were on the spectrum in any way, that's the last place you wanted to end up. You would want to pretend to be normal in order not to go to that place.
It's the opposite of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You don't want to get to the event, as they called it in that movie. Right.
So yeah, you're right. This is overall, I had a great time with this movie, and F. Murray Abraham just delivered an iconic performance. Just his facial expressions, and you can just feel the jealousy that just burns off of him throughout the entire performance. And like you said in the movie, how he broke that priest, because at the end, it's like, I think the priest was questioning if he had the right profession now.
Right. It's so good. Yeah. Abraham is so, like, everybody's great in this. Like, Tom Hulce and he both got nominated for Best Actor at the Academy Awards, and Abraham won the Oscar for his performance in this.
Right. So we're done talking about our favorite part now. Let's move on to our next segment. We're going to talk about the Trivia Top 10. This is the most fascinating pieces of trivia that I was able to find on IMDb, and I hope that this stuff is correct.
You never know with IMDb.
You never know with IMDb. You are correct, but as of right now, I'm going to take it as gospel. So why don't you start us off?
So yeah, this one is definitely true because the film, ironically enough, helped spark a revival of Salieri's music, which had previously languished in obscurity.
Yeah, that's funny because he gives the air of a pop star whose music isn't hitting anymore, right? Because the first thing he does is like, in the movie, the first thing he starts playing his music for the priest is like, do you remember this? And the priest like, no. Do you remember this? And the priest like, no. Do you remember this? Like, oh yeah, I know that one. That's catchy.
Oh, yeah,
That's a bop, man. That joint hits. I remember that joint. He was like, yeah, that ain't mine. That's my rival that I tried to kill.
Yeah.
I tried.
Such a good opening. It lets you know exactly what kind of movie you're in for and exactly who this dude is.
Right. So when shooting the scene in which Salieri is writing down the death mass under Mozart's direction, Tom Hulce was deliberately skipping lines to confuse F. Murray Abraham in order to achieve the impression that Salieri wasn't able to fully understand the music by being dictated. So yeah, that was... You go too fast.
It's like it makes no sense. Oh, that's good because that scene that's another scene that I thought had as potentially one of my 5 is that whole all-nighter that they pulled.
Yeah, that's definitely one of mine too. I liked it. That's another scene that I remember, and I liked it because Mozart, when Salieri was saying you're going too fast, he needed to hear the music in his head. He needed to hear the opera before he could write it down, before he could comprehend it. Because he didn't just want to dictate it. He wanted to experience it in his head. And he couldn't do it. It's like, wait, let me catch up. Let me hear what you're hearing so I can understand what's going on. And so when Mozart continued to coach him through it, then he could hear it. And I like the way, like, they do this throughout the movie, but I like the way they kind of played the music that the people were thinking of when they were just writing it down. So that was fascinating. Yeah.
So that was cool. I love that moment because when, when you hear it because the characters are like imagining in their head. That was one of the cool moments too when I was seeing it live, and like there's this scene that's kind of like where he's flipping through the different pages and they're playing. It was like, here's this song, and I was like, man, those guys down there are like the orchestra's playing it right now. But one thing I was thinking, I was like, does that count as diegetic or non-diegetic? Right? Is that like right? Like, what do you think? Because I'm like. Because it is music that people are hearing, but it's not actually being played. I don't know. I was like, what does that count as?
Technically, it'd be non-diegetic because it's something that's in his head. So it's something that he's thinking about. If it was diegetic, then there'd obviously be an orchestra in his chamber playing the music, but there wasn't. It's kind of easy to tell whether or not it's diegetic if in a period piece, because
but most of the time, non-diegetic music is just music that the audience is hearing that nobody in the movie is hearing, but they're kind of hearing it in their head. So I don't know. It's like a weird middle ground. I think.
Right. But yeah, that was I think the scene that you're talking about was when he invited Constance or whatever her name is to his house in order to get Mozart a job and then sent her away after he had her stripped down. So it was that one. And that was, I enjoyed that. That was fascinating. He's flipping through music and then they're playing the music so you could hear what he was hearing and you understood that, and why he was impressed with all of this. He's like, all of these are original? I was like, yeah.
Right. He's like, no notes.
He wrote these last night or in a couple of hours. He wrote these in his sleep. You poor slob. Right.
And then exactly. And then they bring it back in that scene you're talking about at the end when it's like they're he's dictating, he's composing, and they can hear, he's like, bum, and you're hearing the actual score on the. So I think that was so cool to bring that back at that moment.
All right, well, get the next one.
All right, my turn. I got so into it, I forgot. Milos Forman insisted that his lead actors retain their American accents so they could concentrate on their characters and performances instead. Which I think is very interesting, because that's one kind of thing you always like run into. It's like, okay, when you're doing like a period piece, doing a movie where it's like set in like some other place, do you do the thing that like Ferrari does, where everybody's gonna like, you know, you have Adam Driver doing like, Mamma Mia, you know, like he's doing his very like Italian accent, which is like, you get it, you know, it kind of helps you like immerse in it, but it's also like he's kind of doing an accent, he's thinking about that, and then you're also like, well, why would he be, you know, speaking? He's speaking Italian, so why are we hearing English but just in an Italian accent? If we're hearing English anyway, we might as well hear, you know, English. And I know that's one thing they did, for example, with Chernobyl, was they were just like, everyone just speaking your normal accents, you know, because this is going to be, it's a period piece. We're not going to have everyone do these Russian things. So I always kind of, I think it's interesting either way, but I really think that it was the right decision for this movie for them not to be doing like, you know, Austrian and German and Italian accents.
Right. I think that in the first place, I think this is Milo politely saying your accent sucks. Don't do it. Right. I think he's just being polite. And then the second thing is that accents only work for basically the target audience. So this is I think this is an American production. And so the target audience is American. So the accents would only work for Americans. You start marketing it internationally, those accents typically won't work for other regions. Like, so if you're trying to fake an Italian accent, Italian's going to pick out, you know, that ain't real. I don't like the way that sounds or whatever.
Right.
Like Americans are better at doing English accents than any other accents. And so when they can do that, but anything outside of that, it's not going to sound authentic. So, there are some recent examples, Scarlett Johansson doing, no, not Scarlett Johansson. No, I think she did do a slight Russian accent in her first appearance in Iron Man. And then she didn't do it any other time.
I think she does it in like some flashbacks, I want to say.
Yeah. I'm trying to think I can't remember her name right now, but she played the Scarlet Witch when she first appeared. She was doing
Elizabeth Olsen. Yeah, she kind of loses her her accent. Right.
She tried to have an accent. Actually, her and Aaron Taylor Johnson did slight accents, and then later on in the later movies, she dropped her accent, except in very specific moments.
They even call it out in WandaVision.
Right.
That accent really comes and goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, like Black Panther is another example. It's not just Black Panther. It's pretty much any movie when you have American actors doing an African accent, it's not going to sound authentic to Africans. And it's like, I had a conversation with a Nigerian, and I was like, well, maybe you can say, like, I was specifically talking about Black Panther. So she was saying that, you know, none of these accents sound authentic. They all sound fake. And I was like, well, maybe you can say that because Wakanda was isolated, that their accent was going to be slightly different. She's like, no, if you are from the continent, people know when you're from the continent and when you're just trying to fake an accent. And I was like, well, the thing is, it sounds real to us, like, because we don't know, we don't have the fidelity to understand the difference. So, and the movie was made for an American audience. And then if you're going to do a movie about African or Africa in America, then you had better make an effort to do an African accent, because that's what we expect. And then the last thing I want to say about accent is that John Leguizamo had did a joke a long time ago about like maybe like 200 years in the future, they're going to be doing a play or a new movie about the West Side Story, and everybody will be speaking an English accent in there. And it's like, you're wondering why they're doing an English accent in a West Side Story. And that is because if you look at any period piece, like that's from 200 years ago, everybody's speaking with an English accent, because so much, it's like, it doesn't matter where, like the Gladiator, they're in Italy.
Right.
So you have Italians and you have, the Spaniard who plays the titular character, and I forgot, the actor wanted to do a Spanish accent, and the
Russell
director,
Crowe,
Russell Crowe wanted to do a Spanish accent, and Russell Crowe was like, no, not Russell Crowe, well, Ridley Scott. Thank you. You have all of the memory. Ridley Scott says, no, you're going to do an English accent like everybody else, and in Italy, and he had that same conversation for Thor: Love and Thunder. So he was filmed doing first the English accent and then the Greek accent. And so they decided to go with the Greek accent. So stuff like that. I don't know how real his Greek accent is. You would have to ask a Greek, but it was one of the things that made the movie delightful.
Apparently, because Russell Crowe's Australian, and I guess there's a lot of like Greek food vendors and stuff like that in Australia, and I guess that's kind of like what inspired that specific accent. So he's doing Greek, but he's doing like specifically like a Greek expat in Australia, which is I guess what he's more familiar with. So I can't speak to how accurate it was to any of that, but I thought I always found that interesting.
Right. So I love accents. I didn't really have a problem with it in this movie. But I think that was smart. I think that was smart for them to concentrate on their acting rather than try to do the accent and the acting. And like I said before, I think he was just being polite.
That might be the case.
So up next you have Tom Hulce. Tom Hulce only knew how to play the guitar before shooting. So Foreman said that they could cheat it, but it would be good if we learn how to play the piano. Hulce spent 6 hours a day for 6 months learning how to play the piano and every Mozart symphony that was in the film. As a matter of fact, that really happened. That really is Hulce playing the piano on his back in one scene. Well, I think when they're holding him upside down and backwards, that's him playing the harpsichord or piano or whatever that instrument is. So, he got some new skills in this movie.
Yeah, that's always really cool when actors do that. Like I know Gosling also did that for La La Land. Like he learned to play the piano just for that. And yeah, it's impressive. I think of like, The Princess Bride, how they learned to fence for that movie. Because, you can cheat, right? But you can always kind of tell, and it takes you out just like the smallest bit, especially if, like I'll be watching a movie. My dad, who's a musician, will be like, they're not really playing. That's so like, especially it's like, it's the same thing as like when I see somebody playing like a video game in a movie or something, like what? They're just pressing buttons, they're not doing it. Right. When you see somebody actually doing it, it lends, it's like they did put in the work. They really cared about this thing. And it's really nice when you see that. Yeah.
When it's your particular skill or your particular profession, you're going to notice the imperfections. So if you're watching a movie about firefighters and you're not a firefighter, then you're not going to know what they're doing is wrong or improper. But when a firefighter is watching it, there's like, that ain't right. That ain't how that goes. That's but
absolutely.
It depends on who your intended audience is. So like in a movie Backdraft, which is about firefighters, that was made for firefighters. So they made sure that the actors were put through actual firefighter training and they get an actual shape to go through the actual drills so that when they do their movements, it looks authentic. It doesn't look like they're just going through the motion. It doesn't look like they're faking it. And I remember one particular scene. This was Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and True Lies. And he's supposed to be playing a CIA analyst or whatever. And he's on his computer and he's just kind of like banging on the keys on the computer. It's like, oh, he's not really typing. He's just banging on the keyboard. He's not actually typing. And it doesn't ruin the movie. He didn't need to learn to type to be in this movie. But I could tell that it wasn't authentic. And I imagine it's the same thing for musicians or any other person in a specialized field who understands how something is supposed to move.
Yeah. And so just whenever you go the extra mile like that and you put that work in, and seeing how immaculate the rest of this film was, it makes sense that they did that.
Yeah. Like in Star Wars, everybody in Star Wars who has a lightsaber, they all know how to lightsaber fight. They all take actual fencing. They all know, and then after they fence, they have a choreographed fight, and then they practice choreographing so good that the director has to tell them to slow down because they're moving too fast. The camera can't catch it.
Right. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. All right. Well, next piece of trivia is one we already touched on quite a bit, but this movie was shot without the use of light bulbs or other modern lighting devices. As I said, mostly by candlelight, natural lighting. Obviously, they do some stuff that probably used some reflective sheets and stuff like that, but that's still real impressive.
Yeah, it was really good. So Tom Hulse said he based Mozart's distinctive, obnoxious laugh on the very famous director he worked with, who laughed in an identical manner. As of 2016, he has still refused to name the director. Somebody has to know who this cat is, because that's a laugh right there. Somebody knows, and they're
gotta
not
figure
talking.
it out. There's got to be a way.
Yeah, just look for the director who never laughs in interviews, and it's probably that one.
Yeah. All right, and then so we already mentioned how Tom Hulse learned to do all this stuff, but F. Murray Abraham also learned to read and conduct music for his role. So once again, completely just, these guys really, really put in the work.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Salieri says that Mozart composed his first concerto at the age of 4, his first symphony at 7, and a full-scale opera at 12. Modern scholarship believes that Mozart wrote his first symphony, that's Symphony Number 1 in E-flat, K16, at the age of 8, and his first concerto, Piano Concerto Number 1 in F, K37, at 11 years old. As for the opera, the term, quote, full scale is open to interpretation, but most would cite La Finta Simplica or Simplice. And that's K46A. It was written when Mozart was 12. However, Mozart's father routinely lied about his son's age to make him seem even more of a prodigy. So Salieri's statement was quite possibly what was then believed. So, yeah, I mean, still, you're writing stuff at 8 or 9 or 10 years old. It's still pretty impressive. It was like,
right.
You don't have to sell me toast.
Right. Exactly. It's just like, man, I'm 34 and I could not write a single sheet of music. So much less read it. So the fact that he is writing all this, very, very impressive. Mozart's middle name, Amadeus, for which the film is named, in Latin means God's beloved. This is a central theme of the film, as Salieri believes that Mozart's composition of music is so perfect that the only explanation is Mozart is merely a vessel for God who is truly composing the music, or that God bestowed this ultimate talent upon Mozart.
Yeah, like as we discussed before, he was fighting God when he was fighting Mozart. So,
so that's cool. I didn't realize that before this, that his middle name in real life, Amadeus, which is, like you said, the title of the movie, has this thematic through line to what's going on in the movie. That's really cool.
Yeah, I had not realized that either. And it should have been included because the last part of that is Deus, which in most languages mean God. But Amadeus, that's pretty awesome. And I got some more things on his name because like you, I enjoy linguistic traps. I get into the deep end. I actually went off IMDb. I was like, let me see what Wikipedia says.
Yeah.
So Mozart was baptized as Johann Chrysostomus Wolfgang Gottlieb Mozart. So to break this down, Johannes Chrysostomus, because he was born during the feast of Saint John Chrysostom, and it was the custom of the Catholic Church to name children after saints. Chrysostomus means golden mouth. So this is, so that's not the name that we usually hear or think about when we think about Mozart. He doesn't actually go by that name in public. That's not how he signs documents. But that's his given birth Catholic name. the second part is that Wolfgang is in German means walks with wolves, which is awesome. So if I get to name another child, that child will be named Wolfgang.
Nice. Wolfie.
Yeah, I like that he was called, his wife called him Wolfie, and that's just awesome.
Yeah.
So Gottlieb is the German form of the Latin name Amadeus. He also calls himself Amadeo in Italian and Amadee in French. And then in further reading, I was reading that basically wherever he happened to be, he would just adopt that language's version of his name. So if he was in Italy, he would go by the Italian version of Amadeus. And if he was in France, he would go by the French version. So wherever he's at, he's good. Like he spoke a couple of languages, so he was amicable to change his name.
Yeah, that's cool. You just change it up. He's like, all right, I'm to the Italians, I'm this, to the French, I'm this. Yeah, I like that.
Right. And I don't know. I guess most people just call him by his last name anyway, which doesn't really change. Yeah. It doesn't really translate that well. And I don't even know why we even go by his middle name anyway. Like, we either call him Mozart or we call him Amadeus. We rarely refer to him as Wolfgang. So that's kind of wild. At least how we think of him in a modern context.
Right. I wonder if like this movie, because I always think just Mozart, you know, like I feel like, you know, a lot of times people just don't even use the first name or the middle name, but like I feel like part of the reason why we think of him as Amadeus is because of this movie, you know? Right.
That could be it. I'm not exactly sure. There's a song called "Rock Me Amadeus," and I used to think that it was some part of the soundtrack of this movie, but it was actually, that song was written by German artist Falco. He wrote it a year after this movie came out. And when I think of this movie, I think of that song.
I think that song kind of rode the wave of this movie's popularity. I think they were like, Amadeus, all right, let's do it. Like, right. I think, yeah. I got right. One more piece of trivia too that wasn't on the list. Can I hit you with it? All right. So Tom Hulce reportedly used John McEnroe, the famous tennis star's mood swings, as a source of inspiration for his portrayal of Mozart's unprecedented genius. And I thought that was very interesting because I'm a big Johnny Mac fan. And yeah, he's just kind of has the same vibes. And he's like this, so they're both these kind of crazy savants who just kind of like, you know, they would just, McEnroe was one of the greats, but he would just like flip this thing. He also didn't know how to like, you know, play the politics game of it. He would always get penalized and stuff like that. Much unlike, you know, his version of Salieri, I guess, which would have been, oh my gosh, I'm spacing on his name. Bjorn Borg. Of course, Bjorg was very, very good. But yeah, I thought that was a cool little tidbit I wanted to add.
Yeah, I don't know. I would say that he's not angry enough. Mozart in this movie is not angry enough.
That's true. McEnroe could throw a tirade like nobody else.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it for the trivia. Let's go on to our next segment. We're going to talk about what the critics thought. The critics gave it 89%. The audience score was 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. IMDb has it at 8.4 out of 10. Extraordinarily high review for IMDb and critics review as a whole. So let's get into what some of these critics are talking about.
Yeah, so Eve Hoffman of Vogue wrote, the film makes too many claims to verisimilitude to allow for suspension of disbelief, but the excitement of absorption in what remains a riveting dramatic story in the vitality of images are almost enough to override all the objections. Which I'm like, all right, like, okay. Like, you're saying basically it looks really pretty and it's like, yeah, this movie isn't super realistic. And you're like, yeah, it's okay. Salieri didn't actually kill Mozart. Like, who cares? You know, it's you know, this is obviously taking some liberties for a good story, which, by the way, this is. And yeah, you're right. It does look really, really good. but that's not overriding the story. That's working in tandem with it. So I'm sorry, Eve, but that's a bad take.
Well, she does admit that it was a riveting, dramatic story. So
That's true.
she's definitely giving kudos to the story.
But David Denby of the New York Magazine and Vulture wrote an even more a review I disagree with even more, which is some of the exuberant large scale some of this exuberant large scale movie is charming and inventive, and some of it is pitifully trashy. The last third of Amadeus is a disaster. I think this review is a disaster because I think the last third of Amadeus is its crowning achievement. That's when it all comes together, even without the scenes, the context earlier in the director's cut. Like I love the ending. I think it's so good. Like we said, that I absolve you last scene, the whole all-nighter, all that stuff, it works so well. So I don't know what he was talking about, but I love the ending of this movie.
Right, yeah. Especially at the end of the movie, you have the death of his father, him going further and further into sickness and an obsession, and then basically a lot of focusing on a lot of the wrong things. I think maybe he had a touch of what we now call ADHD. I felt like he definitely had, and then it's Salieri just constantly messing with him. Like Salieri shows up at his door, and the mask that his father wore, talking about, I want you to write this death mask. It was like, all right, I guess if you're gonna give me some money, I might as well. But Salieri could have just given him money, right?
And then he like looks at the picture of his dad and is like, it does that zoom in on his the picture, so it's just like his dad is watching. He thinks he's being haunted. It's so good.
Right. So Stephen Hunter from Baltimore Sun wrote, "It's a film that increases in suspense and tension as it progresses, but more importantly, it ripens in the imagination afterwards, which is exactly where so many films disintegrate. Music in Amadeus isn't the food of love, but it's the food for thought." And yeah, that's a pretty impactful review. I liked how he's right. When you, as you walk away from the theater, there are some movies where you walk away and you're like, that when you think about that doesn't actually work. But then with this movie, you're constantly thinking about the symbols and what it all means. And you think about the deeper meaning. And it's the type of thing that people want to go back and watch the movie again to confirm the meaning that they found or find some deeper meaning in the movie. So yeah, that all tracks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really well put review. It's a movie that does have all these themes that come together really well. So I think he put it correctly there.
Yeah. And on the flip side, we have Marcia Macredo from Arizona Republic. She wrote, "What has happened in the long-awaited, much acclaimed Milos Forman film with its script by Schaefer is that the popularization has gone so broad and so far afield of its elevated subject as to make that subject seem ridiculous." I don't know exactly if I would agree with that. I think that Mozart had an extraordinary life, and so for ordinary people, his life would seem ridiculous. So I don't think she's like really engaging in a movie at its own at the movie's premise itself, right? So I guess it would seem ridiculous, but it's like, have you ever dealt with a genius? Have you ever dealt with somebody who could just, where you write a song and they just fixed your song in front of you, in front of the most important people in your life? Like, that's never happened to most of us.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Like this is a movie about like these big, ridiculous personalities. And there has to be, if Mozart isn't like this, then Salieri doesn't go on the journey that he goes on where he wants to destroy him. It doesn't make any sense. So I don't know what she's talking about.
Yeah. In a movie like, in a personality like Mozart, you kind of have to go big or go home. That's one of the things. Yeah, exactly.
Right. There's a reason that he also got nominated for and he, might have won if F. Murray Abraham hadn't also been in this movie and won the Academy Award.
Right. So that's it. And finally, Amadeus is, as of this recording, available on streaming. And that's it for today. Keep in mind that a movie about the rise of, I'm reading the song wrong. It's funny how you write stuff and then you read it wrong.
I get that.
So, basically what I want to do is I want to keep in mind that what's about to be released is The Rise of the Noble King Mufasa. They're doing a prequel of a movie that we cherish, The Lion King. And so because they're doing that, I'm going to have a guest on. His name is, you mentioned him earlier, Quinn Q, to talk about the Disney animated classic, The Lion King. So we're going back to the original animated version, and maybe that'll prep us for this prequel that they're about to debut. I noticed, have you seen the trailer for Mufasa?
I have, yeah.
Right. So I noticed that the animal's a little bit more animated, so to speak. That was my big problem with the last one, the Jon Favreau one. It was like they didn't have that like expression, like they just looked like boring, dirty lions. They didn't look like like when there's that meme where like Mufasa dies and in the the animated movie, like Simba's got his like jaw open, he's like and then in the CGI version he's just kind of like looking without an expression on his face. Right. But I can see what they were trying to do. And I think what they were missing is John Attenborough's narration. So if they had John Attenborough narrating the whole Lion King movie, then that would have worked better, because it's like you have something like I don't know if he narrated Meerkat Manor, but if you ever watch a show like that, you have a narrator telling you what to feel about the meerkats. And so that helps. Like the meerkats don't have any expressions, but you're totally invested in the family dynamics of Meerkat Manor, right? So,
yeah. Right. I love all those things that he does, like Planet Earth and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So if he did that
those are always...
if he did that for the live action Lion King, it probably would have went over better. Because as you said, the lions only have two expressions, and that's bored or very angry. So
and I think it's David Attenborough.
David Attenborough. Yeah, I was getting the name wrong.
Yeah.
So if you enjoyed this episode, and check out our other shows, episode 57, The Last Action Hero, that features F. Murray Abraham in a cameo, or episode 139, Dune from 1984, that starred Kenneth McMillan hamming it up as best he could. You can also follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Don't forget that you can contact us with any questions or comments or suggestions at fanmail@backlickcinema.com. And Derick, do you have any additional plugs?
Yeah, just I would also like to mention that I do a couple other shows. We talked a lot about Marvel stuff. So I do, whenever there's a new Marvel movie, I do a show called Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones, where I talk about the MCU. So check that out as well. And then every other Monday, because Underrated is released on every other Monday. Mondays when it doesn't come out, I do a co-host a podcast called Midnight Film Society with my friend Damien, where it's just kind of generally talking about movies. But yeah, Underrated Movie Podcast is the big one.
Awesome. That's great. So I need to write those down too, those other ones that you mentioned. So I know that you've enjoyed Derick McDuff, so please check out Underrated, the movie podcast. And I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe, share a movie from yesteryear with your family, hug your loved ones, and if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.